Okay, let's get into this. We're doing a deep dive today into something really quite difficult, but, well, incredibly important.
Hmm.
Our source is a BBC report, and it gives a pretty stark look, actually, at the reality for Vietnamese migrants trafficked here to the UK, often forced into awful labor, things like working on cannabis farms.
That's right. And what really jumps out from the source, I think, is how directly it connects this trafficking to just overwhelming family debt.
Dead, yeah.
It shows how these, like, astronomical sums owed to loan sharks become the very reason people get pushed into forced labor. It's like the debt becomes the chain.
And our goal here for you listening is really to pull out the essential insights from this reporting quickly. We want to understand not just that it's happening, but, how this whole cycle of debt and exploitation actually works.
Yeah, the systems behind it.
Exactly. The systems and also the really personal, devastating costs for the individuals involved, like the ones the BBC spoke to.
And to really get that, the source points to a crucial starting point. The lack of reputable lenders in Vietnam, proper banks, legal options. They're just not accessible for many.
So that's the initial vulnerability.
Yeah, precisely. It forces families towards these, well, illegal loan sharks. And they charge absolutely crippling interest rates, impossible to keep up with.
And here's a really key bit from the source. These loan sharks, they're not just acting alone, are they?
No, not at all. What's quite revealing is that they seem to work directly with trafficking gangs. It's like a partnership.
Right.
So when those huge debts inevitably go unpaid, the gangs step in. They basically see the people who owe money as commodities.
It's a way to get paid back.
Exactly. By forcing them into labor.
Yeah.
It's a horrible form of repayment.
The scale the source mentions is, well, it's pretty shocking. It says nearly a third, almost 1 in 3 of the 3,602 Vietnamese migrants who came over on small boats last year were identified as potential modern slaves.
Yeah, nearly a third. And troublingly, the source suggests that number might actually climb higher as, more people are properly identified. It takes time.
Wow, almost a third.
Yeah.
That really puts it in perspective. And to get beyond the stats, the source shares personal stories. Let's talk about Nam. He's from Ha Tinh province.
Mm-hmm.
His family got into this situation because his father was very ill, lung cancer. And the debt they took on from a loan shark, the figure cited is the equivalent of 186,564 yuan.
That's just an unbelievable amount. It speaks volumes about their desperation, right?
Absolutely.
And because of that debt, the gangs targeted Nam and his sister. They were essentially told, you have to go abroad, you have to work this off.
And his journey, the way the source describes it, it's just harrowing.
It really is. It lays bare the brutality. He was taken to Russia first on a fake passport, then moved through Europe.
And then the bit about being forced into a refrigerated lorry in France, they threatened to kill him if he didn't get in.
Yeah, just terrifying coercion. He eventually arrived here in the UK via Dover.
And the exploitation didn't stop when he arrived, did it?
No, absolutely not. The gangs kept control. The source says he was first forced to clean houses, unpaid.
Unpaid.
And then, as we often hear in these cases, he was sent to work in a cannabis factory.
The conditions he described there, it's almost hard to comprehend. Beaten, forced to work 19 hours a day.
19 hours.
Zero chance of escape. And that quote, the thought that haunted him, I could die in there without anyone knowing, it just stays with you.
It really does. It shows the utter despair, the isolation. And tragically, when the police did eventually find him, the source mentions he had broken bones in his spine from the abuse.
Oh my God.
And it makes clear this isn't just over for him now he's found. He's got ongoing physical problems, mental health issues. And he doesn't know when or if he'll fully recover.
Van's story, the other one in the report, adds another really important dimension because his route into this was different.
Yes, that's crucial. He actually came here legally as a student. A completely different starting point.
Which you'd think would be safer.
Exactly. But it shows how insidious this debt trap is. As his student visa was running out, his family back home dropped a bombshell.
Let me guess, debt.
Yep. They revealed they'd also borrowed from loan sharks, and now he was expected to stay and work illegally for 2 years to pay their debt.
And the threats weren't just against him personally, were they? The source mentioned threats against his family, too.
That's a key tactic. They threatened to beat him, yes, but they also made it clear his family back in Vietnam would not be able to live in peace if he didn't cooperate. It's remote control, essentially.
Controlling him through fear for his family, horrible.
And just like Nam, he ended up forced to work on a cannabis farm. Held there, couldn't leave. The source says he got really ill, constant nosebleeds.
And he was found when the gang was trying to move him again, smuggling him into Ireland.
Yes, found by Border Force officials then. But what happened after he was found is, well, it's really telling and points to a big systemic problem. Well, the source says, initially, the authorities didn't believe he was a trafficking victim. They just saw him as someone who'd overstayed his visa.
Oh, right.
He was told he'd be deported back to Vietnam. And get this, his initial reaction was relief. He thought, great, I'm going home.
Which seems backwards, but then...
But then the terrible realization hit him. Going home didn't erase the debt. The gangsters would find him in Vietnam. They'd make his life and his family's life miserable.
So even escaping the farm wasn't escaping the gang's control.
Not at all. That despair, that feeling of being trapped no matter what, led him to tell the BBC he reached a point where he didn't want to live. It shows the absolute power these gangs wield, even across borders.
And this issue, this difficulty in actually identifying victims, is something the Salvation Army highlighted in the source. They warned about the risk of victims being, quote, misidentified, criminalized, and denied access to support.
Yeah, that's a major concern. Why does that happen? The source doesn't explicitly detail all the reasons, but you can infer it's probably a mix of things.
Like what?
Well, the victim's own fear. Maybe trauma, preventing them from speaking out immediately. Language barriers, definitely. The fact that trafficking is often deliberately hidden. And maybe sometimes officials focusing more on the immigration side than the potential exploitation.
It sounds incredibly complex.
It is. The positive side, for Nam and Van at least, is that eventually they were referred into the National Referral Mechanism that's the UK's official system for identifying and supporting modern slavery victims.
Okay, so there is a system.
Yes, and they're now getting help from UK charities. So the system can work, but it's clear there are significant hurdles to overcome first.
That support must be vital. And linking this to the bigger picture, the source mentions the government's stance. The Home Office says it has an unwavering commitment to tackling modern slavery.
And there's a quote from the minister stressing the need to put pressure on these organized gangs all along their supply chains, right from the start.
Which suggests they understand it often starts outside the UK.
Exactly. Tackling the root causes, like the debt issue in Vietnam and the gangs operating there.
And the source mentions one specific action. The government has expanded social media campaigns in Vietnam, warning people about the, quote, risks and realties of trying to migrate irregularly.
Trying to counter the traffickers' lies, basically.
Yeah.
But then you have the Salvation Army's point, which adds another layer. They say modern slavery is often hidden in plain sight.
Hidden in plain sight. That's a powerful phrase.
It is. And they're basically calling on all of us, the public, to be more aware, to look out for the signs.
What sort of signs does the source mention? What should people look for?
Well, there are several. Some might seem more obvious, maybe like workers who look scared or really unkempt, maybe malnourished, or you notice untreated injuries.
Okay.
But it also lists less obvious things, which I think are really important for everyone to know. Things like noticing someone else always paying for their travel or always speaking for them.
Right, controlling them.
Yeah. Or maybe seeing people being picked up or dropped off at really odd hours or in unusual places, or even just noticing a worker who doesn't seem to know their own address, where they're actually living or working.
Those less obvious ones, they really show how subtle it can be, how easy it might be to just walk past and not notice if you're not thinking about it.
Exactly right. It's not always some dramatic, obvious scene. It can be happening quietly right there in our communities.
So, bringing this deep dive towards a close, the main takeaways from this BBC source seem pretty stark. And they're all linked, aren't they?
Absolutely. There's the immense power of debt, how it makes people so vulnerable to traffickers. Then there's the horrific danger and exploitation they face, both getting here and once they arrive.
And then the ongoing challenge of actually identifying victims and getting them the support they need, even when they're technically found.
Yeah, the source really managed to go beyond just numbers. It gave us a real window into the devastating personal impact on people like Nam and Van. It reminds you these are real lives being shattered.
Definitely. And thinking about that phrase, hidden in plain sight, from the Salvation Army, maybe here's a final thought for you, the listener, to take away from this source material. If the signs are there, but easily missed, what responsibility do we all have, just as ordinary people in our communities, to actually try and notice, to be aware and maybe report something if it doesn't feel right?